Okay, well, let's cover some of the things that have come up during the past week, questions that I have received from other agents and other managers. Um, First one is dealing with seller voiding a contract. Okay. A seller does not have any right to void a contract. Throughout our contract, there's only a couple instances, and I'll cover those. The only person that really has the right to void the contract is the buyer. Okay. So the instance that we had, the seller sent over, they were tired of waiting, so they sent a notice to void and um, a release of the contract the day after they refused to give another extension. Um, so at midnight on the day that your contract is supposed to settle, if you have not settled, the contract is already void at 12:01 a.m. So the seller did not need to void, just send the release over. They were asking for the deposit, um, and the agent and the purchaser is saying, we only need a couple more days. Well, there is no more couple more days, right? But the seller did not have to void the contract at that point. Paragraph 35 of our contract is time of the essence. So everything is written in stone. If you can't accomplish what you were supposed to in that time frame, then you're going to be in default. So keep that in mind. Give you some instances where the buyer does have the right to void the contract. Page 28, if you have your contracts package, the home inspection addendum, it does call for the right for the purchaser to void. You need to make sure you do it right. You use the form that says notice to void and send that. And then you can also attach to it the release of the sales contract. Okay. So that's one time. The purchaser can also void under POA and Condo Act, and under the financing contingency if they used choice number 3. Now, the only time that the seller really has the right to void, you would find under paragraph 20 of your sales contract, and that is if the title work is not ready. The title work is just not ready. It calls for an automatic extension of 10 business days, which is basically 14 days. At the end of that time period, if the attorneys still are not ready to go forward, then because they don't have the title work ready, then at that point, the seller could send a notice to void. Okay. The other time would be under paragraph 35. Time is of the essence. Okay. Unless it's for Tyler RESPA reasons, the seller does not have to grant the extension under Tyler RESPA. They could void the contract, and they do not have to give an extension of time if your buyer is not ready to go to settlement because their loan is not ready. So if you look at paragraph 35, I'd like to examine this one while we're talking about it. It's on page 12 of your contracts package if you have that. Time is of the essence means that dates and timeframes agreed to by the parties must be met. Failure to meet stated dates or timeframes will result in a waiver of contractual rights or will be a default under the terms of the contract. So these dates are written in stone. If you put 30 days for settlement, your buyer better be able to get their loan approved and to the table. Okay. Now, the second paragraph is where they're talking about Tyler RESPA. If this contract is contingent on financing and the contingency has not been removed or satisfied, any delay of settlement date necessary to comply with buyer or lender's obligations pursuant to Tyler RESPA which means there was an 1/8% increase in the interest rate from the loan estimate to the CD. Prepayment penalty was added that wasn't there before. Okay. Does not constitute a default by the buyer, but the seller may declare the contract void in writing. So this is one of the instances where the seller could actually void the contract. Okay. So if your seller gets upset about the home inspection items being asked, too many of them, and say, just, I don't want to even deal with this, just void the contract. Remember that they have no right to void. They have to go through the entire negotiating period, and they have to go through the right to void period of the buyer. So only the buyer has the right to void. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. Another question I received was power of attorney. The agent's mother is in a nursing home. The father had died. He has power of attorney for the mother. Okay. And he said, how do I handle this? Do I put both names on the listing because that's who it's titled to? Well, no. Power of attorney only exists while someone is alive. Okay. So he did not have power of attorney for the father, but since the father had passed away and they were holding the title to the property, tenants by the entire ownership had transferred over to the mother upon death. Now, what I told them they need is that they need a good, valid, recorded death certificate is going to be necessary for this transaction because they have to prove that the father had passed away. And the power of attorney, what you want to make sure with power of attorney is that it is recordable in Virginia. Virginia has several requirements. So I always advise people, if there's going to be a power of attorney, run it by the attorney at RTS or whatever attorney you want to talk to make sure it is valid and recordable in the state of Virginia. Okay. So there are a couple of types of power of attorney, durable and non-durable. We use durable in real estate, and there are two types of durable, general and specific. If you give someone general power of attorney, they can make all of your decisions for you. We generally deal with a specific power of attorney when it comes to selling a piece of property. And its specific power of attorney is valid until revoked by the party that gave it or death. When someone dies, you no longer have that power of attorney, which can get kind of messy. You know, they listed the property under power of attorney, and then the party that gave the power of attorney passes away. Now it's whoever's listed in the estate. So it can get kind of confusing there sometimes. So always work with your title company to make sure these things are recordable. In Virginia, the requirement is you have to be at least 18 years of age. You must sign the document before a notary for it to be legally valid. They usually have two witnesses. That is not required by Virginia law. But if you're going to use this power of attorney in other states also, then you do need the two witnesses because a lot of other states require not only the notary, but two witnesses. Okay. So power of attorney, make sure recordable in Virginia. Okay. The other was, other question that I got this week. The property has been rented out, but the previous tenant sent a notice the night before, okay, sent a notice the night before that they were supposed to be out, that their new home wasn't finished yet, and they were staying for another month. Now the property had already been rented to another tenant. What do you do? Okay. And basically, there's not too much you can do. They're tenants by the sufferance, but if you go to court to try to get them out, Virginia, Virginia had a moratorium up until September 30th where you couldn't evict people because of the COVID. Uh, that's not a problem anymore, but now you have the CDC that says you can't evict people. Uh, and I want to go over the five requirements for that to be in play. But even if you went to court, there's such a backlog. The courts will now allow evictions as long as it doesn't fall under the CDC guidelines. But there's such a backlog. By the time you get this party into court, there's going to be a 30-day wait at least, and they'll be out of there, but the other tenant couldn't move in. My advice was go to an attorney, get them to send a letter saying, you're going to be tenants of sufferance and you will be responsible for any expenses that are required to be paid by our seller to this other party. It's a tough situation. At this point, I'd be talking to the landlord and probably saying, with everything that's going on right now, I probably wouldn't put the property on the market for lease until the current tenant has vacated. Okay, for several reasons. If someone contracted COVID-19 and they were in the last week of their lease and they are ordered to stay in place for 14 days, you'd be hard pressed to be able to try to evict them under those circumstances. And the other is the holdover tenants. What do you do? Okay. Hopefully they got that worked out with the other party. They called them and they said, well, what are we supposed to do? We're ready to move. I don't know how they worked it out, but that is becoming a major problem. Under CDC guidelines, you cannot evict someone if they meet these 5 qualifications. One, this is a qualification for the tenant to stay in a property. They've used their best effort to look for financial assistance, and there are financial assistance programs out there. They don't expect to earn more than $99,000 a year if they're single, or $198,000 if they're married. They can't pay their full rent because of loss of income or extraordinary medical expenses. 4, they've tried to pay as much of their rent in as timely a manner as they can. And if they were to be evicted, they would likely become homeless and have to live in a shelter or some crowded place. Under this COVID, the court is not going to put them out of the property. So you could have someone in a property that qualifies. If you put it on the market and they come back and say, no, we've met these qualifications, you won't be able to evict them. It's going to be a tough call for you as to how you want to handle renting a property out right now, or even a seller vacating a property at settlement. So they are tenants at sufferance. They've waived a notice to quit, so you don't have to go through all that. But to get into court to evict them is going to be pretty tough. Okay. Related to that, there is a new COVID-19 relief for landlords in the state of Virginia. So a landlord, if the people qualify under the state program for rental assistance, there is a program now in Virginia to allow the landlord to apply for rent assistance for their tenant. And it goes all the way back to April. But there's strict guidelines as to what is required to qualify. I would defer you to check into that program as far as the tenants, applying for the tenants. And the landlord has the right to apply for the tenants for this rent assistance, which would mean they'd get their back rent if the people qualified. Okay. Now, another question I got deals with personal property versus a fixture. Okay. And this deals with a kitchen island. Okay. And I see these kitchen islands all the time. They appear to be built in, but they're not. They're just sitting on the floor. If it's just sitting on the floor, it is not a fixture because it is not permanently attached. The seller has every right to take that with them. And it's becoming the new hot button. It used to be the chandeliers. Now it seems it's these kitchen islands, because I've gotten that question several times in the last month. So when you're writing a contract, when in doubt, write it in a contract. Another example would be these built-in outside charcoal broilers, etc. Is it permanently attached, or is it movable? If it's not permanently attached, it doesn't go. But if the buyer wants it, write it in the contract. Okay. Why argue? We also run into a problem with mirrors in the bathrooms. Okay. Are they permanently attached or not? So when in doubt, write it in the contract. Okay. So those are the things that have arisen this week. Monday is Ask Larry sessions. That's the reason I didn't schedule any part of the contract or anything to talk about. That's when I cover things that have come up during the week that I have seen. Anybody else have anything they want to ask about today? If so, unmute yourself and let's talk about it. Anybody? Well, this could be a short session today then. I appreciate you joining. We only had 3 or 4 agents join us today, but we'll be here every Monday. For Ask Larry, Wednesday is back to basics. So Wednesday, we will be covering the rest of the contingencies and clauses addendums form. Please have that ready to discuss. I also have to teach Broker CE on Wednesday, so I will probably be doing a shorter Wednesday session because I have 4 hours right after that to do for the board. Okay. So if there's no other questions, we're just going to call this a short day today, and I will see you guys on Wednesday. Thank you for joining me.